Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to get us started, so please settle in a little bit, take some seats, say hello to folks at your tables. Thank you, tech crew. All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Yes, it's going to be a talk, but I'm nervous about just talking to you, so please flip your chairs around and get engaged. This will be a one-way dialogue. So thank you all for being here for this address, the first event of the Feminist Fight Club Day on the first day of this year's Diversity Symposium. I am Dr. Cori Wong. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as Assistant Vice President for Gender Equity and the Director of the Women and Gender Collaborative in the Office of the Vice President for Diversity here at Colorado State University. And this is a big day. In addition to kicking off the Diversity Symposium and anticipating our keynote this evening with Kimberly Crenshaw, today falls under the Jewish holiday Sukkot. To those not here because they are observing the holiday, we wish them the happiest of celebrations. And it is also Indigenous Peoples Day, which makes the following even more significant. As I welcome you all to the Feminist Fight Club at CSU Day, I want to draw your attention to where we are here right now in this particular moment, in this particular location, by reading our university land acknowledgement. Colorado State University acknowledges with respect that the land we are on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples and nations. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other Native tribes. We recognize the Indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed. CSU is founded as a land-grant institution, and we accept that our mission must encompass access to education and inclusion, and significantly, that our founding came at a dire cost to Native nations and peoples whose land this university was built upon. This acknowledgement is the education and inclusion we must practice in recognizing our institutional history, responsibility, and commitment. And we can applaud that, too. Because it is Indigenous Peoples Day. So before I begin the address, I also want to acknowledge the many people who make this day possible. This is the third year that we've incorporated FFC at CSU into the Diversity Symposium, which started with our official launch back in 2017. And so I want to give a special thanks to Bailey Boggs, who is the program coordinator who supports the Women and Gender Collaborative and has done a lot to make this possible. As well as Alicia Sprague, who's been putting on the Diversity Symposium for several years now, and Rachel McKinney, our other program coordinator, because it just also happens to be Rachel's birthday, so an extra special day for lots of reasons. I also want to give special thanks to the Symposium Planning Committee and the Laurier Student Center staff for pulling off this event and making it part of the Diversity Symposium, so thank you all. Yeah, right? Thank you. Okay, after this address, the rest of the day is going to be presented by members of the Feminist Fight Club at CSU, and there are going to be so many great sessions that as I go throughout, we'll just be plugging and noting, like, there's a session for that and a session for that too, so just get ready for all that excitement. As always, I am deeply grateful to the members who have contributed extra time and energy today to share some of the special things that we do at the FFC at CSU with all of campus and our community. So if you are a member or you have attended any of our meetings, please raise your hand and give a wave. Yes, thank you all. Let's applaud the members of the FFC too. As you will soon hear quite a bit about, the Feminist Fight Club at Colorado State University is pretty focused on creating spaces for different ways to connect and engage. So in lieu of a Q&A session with me after the address, some FFC at CSU members are already sitting at tables, serving as table hosts, and they are ready to answer your questions and engage in informal, casual conversations about the FFC at CSU immediately following this address. If you're curious about a particular topic or you just want to meet other members, you can refer to the table directories that are on your tables to find out which tables have designated topics. Of course, we hope that you'll be able to just hang around and maybe enjoy some fruit and snacks. But if you can't stay for long, I hope you will take a few minutes to stop by one of our appreciation stations, which are at tables 8, 8, and 8, before heading on to some of those other member-led sessions. And yeah, we have appreciation stations. Because a guiding principle of the Feminist Fight Club at CSU is that we want things to be different, and so we have to do things differently. And we believe that creating a culture of support is a pretty important way to do that. One element of that is to recognize and affirm each other for who we are and the work that we do. A not uncommon dream of some of us in the FFC at CSU has been to flood our campus mail system with notes of appreciation, recognition, and support for each other. So, because such gestures are a kind of fight move that we can practice any day, which, if we do them enough, might eventually become habits and then simply new ways of doing things. So please, before you go, stop by one of the table 8s, take a minute, grab a card on your way out, write a note, and then give it to someone you appreciate. All right, and with that, now I want to talk about the FFC at CSU and why we need to do things differently. So first, a brief introduction into how all of this developed. In the fall of 2016, Jessica Bennett published the book Feminist Fight Club, an office survival guide for a sexist workplace. If you can see the floor, the book is down there. At the time, I was serving as special assistant to the president, leading presidential initiatives under then-President Tony Frank's administration. After assuming leadership of the university initiative to improve the culture and climate around gender, I envisioned a new design and structure that emphasized culture and culture change by increasing employee education and engagement on gender-related issues. We were barely 6 months in after the official launch of the Women in Gender Collaborative when I heard about the book, The Feminist Fight Club, on Instagram. I read it, I thought there could be a pretty unique and cool opportunity here, and I hand-delivered a copy to President Frank. I shared my idea of making this something we could do at CSU, and with only a little prodding and not a lot of resistance from him, President Frank gave the green light to go for it. I was totally thrilled by this yes, but I still had to clarify. I asked, do you mean go ahead and offer this just as a program under the Women in Gender Collaborative, or do you mean as CSU? And he said, do it as CSU. So less than a year later, in 2017, Jessica Bennett came to campus for the official launch at our first FFC at CSU day as part of the Diversity Symposium, and we officially became the first institution of higher education to collaborate with Feminist Fight Club in this way. Yeah. So more than a book signing or a one-time program within a particular department, this was always intended to be something to shift the culture for all of CSU. While the ultimate vision has been to shift the culture of the institution and the entirety of the university, I knew that would take a while and we would have to start somewhere. So the initial goal for the Feminist Fight Club at Colorado State University was pretty simple and practical. It was to carve out spaces within the university where people would have shared language and shared resources and shared expectations for how we were going to work together and support each other in new ways. If we couldn't yet change the culture of the entire institution, we could create pockets within it where things would function differently and where we would all agree to participate in making that a felt difference. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Feminist Fight Club at CSU, let me do a quick rundown of some major talking points to get us all on the same page so you can start to understand how and why the FFC at CSU spaces are different. So let's start with the purpose and the name of the Feminist Fight Club at Colorado State University. When we first started, members made it clear that they joined because they wanted 3 things: education, resources, and community. People wanted to learn more about feminism, gender, inclusion, and intersectionality. They also wanted to develop skills for effectively engaging around these issues, and they wanted a place where they would be supported and feel like they were part of something that had the capacity to make change. Rather than feeling powerless and waiting for change to come from the higher-ups, people wanted to feel like they were doing something to bring about that change themselves. So one of the first things that we did was develop our purpose statement, which names the FFC at CSU as an inclusive space for community growth, learning, and support for all members. We seek to develop our skills in identifying and addressing problematic behaviors that disadvantage women and other marginalized groups. And we build upon the research and strategies presented in the book, Feminist Fight Club. But most importantly, the FFC at CSU is one of those spaces that we carve out for culture change by focusing on holding ourselves accountable to one another as we model and practice the behaviors that foster a campus culture and climate that supports the success of all students and employees. To this end, we commit to support one another through honest reflection, courageous dialogue, and collective action. We were clear that this isn't really about fighting people at all. This is more about learning how to identify common problems and developing the skills to address them so that we can better support ourselves, each other, and even those who aren't a part of the FFC at CSU. And to trust that we would not be alone in any of this, that we would hold each other accountable to do our best in this work. Despite this being our explicit purpose, those who don't know assume a lot of things about the FFC at CSU. The name Feminist Fight Club can land on people in different ways. Some people love it because it sounds like a group that's willing to get some things done. At the same time, some people think that it sounds too aggressive, like we are attacking people, or that we're fighting men. Some don't like the word feminist, particularly with all of its historical connotations. For them, it might conjure up negative stereotypes or caricatures of difficult, angry women, or it signals a white women's movement that hasn't been inclusive in standing up for women of color, trans folks, or indigenous communities. And some say that to call it a club is inherently exclusionary. So yes, we've heard many suggestions, mostly from people who are not involved with the FFC at CSU, who are very concerned about a name change, perhaps to something a little bit more palatable or a little less threatening, at least for those who get a bit uncomfortable when we explicitly name aspects of our culture that really do need to change. But there are several reasons why we stuck with the name. One is to give credit to the book. We are not a book club, but we use the book as a starting place. In addition to being easy to read and informed by research, the book validates many people's experiences that unfortunately might otherwise be dismissed as relatively harmless, isolated incidents, or something that someone is just too sensitive about. The book is also a helpful tool because it's written like a manual that identifies these common behaviors of subtle sexism that most people have experienced or perpetuated, even if they lacked a punny way to name it. But people know the man-interrupter, the one who interrupts women in meetings, and the book cites that women of color are twice as likely to be interrupted. They know the bro-propriator, the one who restates something a woman has said and takes credit for other people's ideas, and the slackluster, who manages to get recognitions or even promotions while doing minimal to mediocre work, while those who put in extra time, service, and effort to keep everything running smoothly for everyone else continue to be tasked with office chores or note-taking. In addition to helping people more readily identify such behaviors, the book provides tips and strategies for how one might respond to them. These are called fight moves, and the fight move mentality is simply that when something happens, you notice it and are prepared to interrupt the problematic behavior and intervene on behalf of yourself or someone else. Fight moves are actions that seek to move the metaphorical needle by disrupting the normal way of doing things. Fight moves present themselves as tangible opportunities for culture change, and there are really so many of them. There's a whole book written about it, but then there are many more even beyond the book. And of course, it should be noted that people have been speaking up and taking subversive actions long before a book came out about it and called these things fight moves. But something I like about the fight moves is that they're not one-time things. You can set a goal to do a fight move every day, and the more practice you get, you could even do a fight move in every meeting. Calling it a fight move makes it feel like more than just speaking up once. It's part of something bigger, something you can do along with everyone else who is practicing their fight moves to make how we do things more inclusive and equitable. Fight moves are actions that intend for things to be different, and by practicing fight moves, we are actively engaged in collectively doing things differently. We actually make things different. So one of the strengths of the book is that it increases self-awareness and sensitivity for what many people experience, but unfortunately, there are no perfect tools, and the book itself has several weaknesses that make it rather imperfect. First, the book can be critiqued for its narrowness and scope that echoes problematic forms of white feminism. It lacks a well-developed lens for race and class and sexuality and ability, which means it doesn't have much to offer in terms of resources for supporting women across differences. It leans heavily on a biological basis for gender, which makes it rather exclusionary. And the fight moves still center heavily on things that one can do for herself more than what one can do to support others. So, in the spirit of doing things differently, one thing that's different about the FFC at CSU is that we explicitly name, own, and seek to address these challenges. I recognize the shortcomings of the book from the beginning, but I still believed that it could be a really valuable resource. So, imperfect as it is, and given the potential of our campus community, I made the decision to go ahead and move forward with it. But that meant that as a group, we had to be extra intentional about how we developed the Feminist Fight Club at CSU and differentiated ourselves from the book Feminist Fight Club. So in addition to shared language and shared resources, we have deliberately built upon the book and moved well beyond it in terms of scope, tone, and strategies by also rooting ourselves in shared expectations for what it means to be part of the FFC at CSU. Central to that has been making space for honest and challenging conversations that emphasize intersectionality, accountability, and creating a culture of support. That requires a willingness to learn, to do the work to educate ourselves about issues that don't directly affect us, and to be accountable to self and others, to willingly give and receive feedback, and to support each other in developing our abilities so that we can better support others too. All right, so now we're all on the same page. You know that the core aspects of the Feminist Fight Club at Colorado State University depend on having shared language, shared resources, and shared expectations of one another. We emphasize accountability, transparency, a willingness to name problematic issues, and a priority for sharing what we learn in order to help each other know how we can do better. And we don't do any of this alone. There are many things that I really love about the FFC at CSU, and one of those things is the flexibility, openness, and willingness on behalf of the people who have been involved with it to try, experiment, and explore new ways of doing things. Now, that's not to say that it all went smoothly and that everything we've put energy into materialized as a glowing success. What I'm saying is that one thing I appreciate about what we've done is that it's been a place where I have learned that it can be okay to try things and sometimes fail. Remember, there had never been anything quite like this before at CSU or anywhere else for us to look to for examples and guidance, so we basically had to make things up as we went along. And people had to be willing to figure it out together. We have tried and done a lot of things, and as one should expect when building something brand new and asking for others to be involved in the process, some things worked and some things did not. In our early stages to promote more inclusive fight moves, we tried indexing the fight moves from the book and creating shared documents to keep track of our own edits and additions that would make them more intersectional. We also use this document to catalog new fight moves of our own making, like the bathroom buddy, which is a way to interrupt harassment trans folks might face in public restrooms, and the meta move, a personal favorite, which is a way to draw attention to something happening in a particular moment and create a learning opportunity for everybody at that table. To build community among members, we tried meetups outside of work in our monthly meetings. We've held meetups for coffee and drinks. We've hosted an off-campus retreat for members, and we even invited people to our homes once or twice. We've explored using Facebook groups to announce job postings, share articles, and seek advice. We filmed clips of people talking about what the FFC at CSU has meant to them, which never fully materialized into a short promo reel. And a small group of undergraduate students led their own conversations to talk about how they could support each other in classroom spaces. And these are the things that didn't quite gain traction for a variety of reasons, but that's okay. And I'm still so proud of the fact that we tried them out. What stands out to me is that such attempts required no less time, energy, or commitment than anything else we've done that stuck with more success. For me, this is all part of the process. And while it risks leaving some people feeling burnt out or maybe even a little discouraged if things don't quite go as we had hoped and planned, it's true that some members have ebbed and flowed in terms of their engagement over the years, but these things highlight the overall willingness to try. There is an underlying degree of collective persistence and perseverance in the FFC at CSU that cannot be overlooked. In this way, the Feminist Fight Club here has also always had a very grassroots and pretty subversive feel to it. This aspect of the culture of the FFC at CSU is captured well by the potato of defiance stickers that are scattered about the room. They were created by Heather Skehan, artist, architect, and sister to our FFC at CSU member Meg Skehan. And these stickers, which have basically become unofficial symbols of the FFC at CSU, reference a quote by author Terry Pratchett, who wrote this: "Fear is a strange soil. It grows obedience like corn, which grow in straight lines to make weeding easier. But sometimes it grows the potatoes of defiance, which flourish underground." The continued willingness for people to try things out, even if it's not clear how they will eventually work out, is a key element of what has helped the FFC at CSU continue to grow, evolve, and be successful. We are not afraid to try in our attempts to do things differently, even if it might fail, and we're not afraid to participate in efforts for culture change, however that might look. Even though the FFC is one of the most visible efforts of the Women and Gender Collaborative, there have been and still are members who come to our monthly meetings but are afraid to put it on their calendars because they don't believe their supervisor would support their participation in it. So another one of my favorite things about the FFC at CSU, which is represented by things like the potatoes of defiance sticker, is that it is our space to do what we want in it so long as it serves our ultimate purpose of creating a more inclusive and equitable culture. For example, this year, each meeting is explicitly focusing on topics that promote anti-racism. And the power of the FFC at CSU is that it's been set up so that we have the capacity to shape, influence, and create it as a collective and be responsive to our community's needs. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to share some hard truths about the culture of the Feminist Fight Club at Colorado State University. The greatest challenge we've been consistently facing is that the FFC at CSU is still predominantly a white and cisgender space, at least in terms of those who show up for the monthly meetings. I think it's important to acknowledge this, in part because it's true, but also because it's not a unique problem. Most spaces are set up and developed such that white and cisgender people are the dominant voice. The problem doesn't go away if we simply try to ignore or hide that. We have been explicit in naming and addressing this in terms of the topics we cover, the resources we share, and the way we hold each other accountable. By making this an explicit area of growth and continued education for our members, we've made some significant improvements in how the meetings feel, especially from when we first started. But we still have work to do to make sure our own spaces are supportive and inclusive of queer and trans people and people of color, especially when it's still predominantly, mostly white people in the room. The good news is that we can decide how to respond to this challenge. So I, for one, invite women of color and queer and trans people to conspire with me for an FFC at CSU takeover. Is it still a takeover if it's an invitation? I think so, yeah. We've also heard that women of color would be more inclined to participate in if they had an FFC at CSU affinity space. This is something we've heard from men too, who are seeking more ways to hold each other accountable. So we are currently exploring what it might look like to create FFC at CSU pods. So check out a session later today if you have ideas for how you might like that to look. The other major challenge we face is that everything people do to participate in and support the FFC is extra service and they don't get formal recognition for it. It's not part of their jobs, people are busy, and some employees' schedules don't even enable them to attend the meetings. So while we have tried to make it as easy as possible for people to stay engaged, there's a session on that, by recording our meetings and sharing our minutes, which are mostly structured as fight moves you can practice, the structural barriers do eventually take a toll on how much people can dedicate themselves to efforts like the FFC at CSU. And this is very unfortunate because these kinds of efforts only work when people can be committed and involved. So now, this is where we touch on some hard truths about the culture around gender at Colorado State University, which is why I believe that we need spaces like the FFC at CSU. So first, it's true that there are a lot of people who perpetuate problematic behaviors that harm, undermine, or disadvantage already marginalized folks, particularly women, women of color, and trans and non-binary individuals. We all should already know this because it's clearly reflected in our employee climate survey data, and we don't do the greatest job of holding people accountable to do better. And while it's true that men are often responsible for many people's experiences of the problematic behaviors that are named, it's not just men. People tend to assume that the focus should be on how men behave, but the truth is that women are often just as culpable of bad behavior, particularly when it comes to undermining other women. In fact, when I first started the FFC and talking about what it might look like, it was informed by conversations I had with several other young women leaders who were new to their leadership roles and weren't feeling like they were supported by the women who were directly above them, and one would expect to be mentoring them. Some of the dynamics between women that are named in the book, such as the womenemy behaviors, you can think mean girls or a queen bee mentality, but I'm not talking about Beyonce. There are other aspects of these dynamics that are not named in the book, but are pretty common among women and have revealed themselves on our campus too. So one is that white women tend not to actively support and affirm women of color. And also that generational differences tend to inform assumptions about the best way to get along and make progress, which can create further tensions among women around how they might be able to support each other too. And finally, everyone needs to do better to advocate on behalf of our trans and non-binary community, period. There's a session for that too. One of the greatest issues with being able to effectively influence broad culture change ultimately comes down to how our campus leaders support it or not. As far as the FFC at CSU is concerned, it's not unusual for members to join the club because they are struggling in toxic work cultures and need a place to gain skills, strategies, and support for how to navigate their own workplaces. But it is particularly heartbreaking to know that many members who leave the FFC at CSU do so because they eventually feel compelled to leave our institution. There have also been several examples where women have tried to bring the FFC at CSU into their own work unit in an attempt to build solidarity for confronting the toxicity of their own culture, but they were ultimately not allowed to because their leadership wouldn't support it. So, for the leaders in the room, if you're wondering what you can do, here are some suggestions. First, join the FFC at CSU yourself so that you can learn from what we do and be a part of this effort. If you want to hear how other leaders have joined and why, there is a session directly for that. Second, encourage and support your employees to join and attend meetings too. If this feels weird because of the power dynamics between you and your direct reports, reflect on why it might be uncomfortable to consider being in that same conversation about how to improve your own workplace culture with the people you work with. Are you maybe part of the problem? And if so, are you willing to be part of the solution? Leaders can also actively make space for employees to practice and share what they learn in the FFC at CSU with others in the unit. You can start staff meetings with appreciations and share articles about pertinent topics and leave time to discuss takeaways from those articles as a group too, and how that might apply to your own unit. You can, better yet, connect with me to plan on how to bring the FFC at CSU into your own unit. Review your websites, your practices, and your collateral materials to make sure that you're using inclusive language. And finally, recognize and reward employee service. In this evaluations, especially if your employees are engaging in service activities that develop themselves or the institution to be more inclusive. Okay, so at this point, now you've heard a lot about the FFC at CSU, but I realize it might still feel like a little bit abstract. We can talk about the problems all day, but we need to understand ourselves and the issues enough to develop practical skills for responding to them. So what do fight moves look like in practice? Again, the fight moves can look like a lot of different things, but to give you an example, let's describe a not uncommon experience, and we'll see how different fight moves could be employed to address it. So imagine, or just recall, a time when you've been in a meeting with a relatively large group of people and someone says or does something that is problematic, that doesn't uphold our principles of community. You notice it, you want to say something, but you're afraid to be the only one to speak up. Now you suddenly feel some reactions in your body and then sense this tension in the room. I like to picture this tension as like a bubble in the room that can grow and create more distance between people as things continue to go unaddressed. So perhaps you catch the eye of a colleague who signals that they noticed it too, But there are plenty of people who don't seem bothered or like they even noticed anything at all. And that is one of the hardest problems about this scenario, which only makes the tension bubble more uncomfortable. It really sucks feeling like you're one of the only people who notice something happening. And it can be exhausting to consistently be the only one to speak about it whenever things do come up. Perhaps, though, you might even be reluctant to speak up for fear of retaliation or backlash if you do, and this fear can be further complicated depending on the identities that you hold. Maybe you're just not sure if what you thought might be a problem was actually a problem, or you're unsure about what exactly to say to address it, especially if you assume that there wasn't an intent to cause any harm by whoever did the thing. But before you know it, you're so caught up in your head and your body that the moment has passed and everyone has moved on, and now it feels too uncomfortable to go back to what happened. And so that tension bubble just keeps crowding everybody out. In these situations, we want to pop that tension bubble by addressing what happened and mitigate the likelihood that only a couple of people will notice it or that someone will feel vulnerable if they speak up to address it. So some fight moves. First, brush up on those common problematic behaviors so that you can better identify things when they happen to. Second, be willing to speak up, especially if you have privileged identities. Even if that means pulling a meta move to just push pause on the moment to give yourself and others an entry point. You can say, hold on, could we just check in for a minute? I think I noticed something. Did something just happen here? And if not, then no harm, no foul. People can just continue on as they were. But if something did happen, now you can name what you observed, you can express how it landed on you, and you can invite others to chime in. This would be the time for others to amplify and echo what you said, to name something like a bias or a microaggression, and create space for more opportunity for others to help address it. Additional options would be to follow up with the people involved one-on-one. You can ask if you can offer support. You could ask if you may provide feedback, and let them know that you're willing to speak up again if it happens in the future. So again, there are so many ways to think about fight moves, and what is appropriate and effective will depend on the context. But the important thing is that we work on becoming aware of these opportunities to do such interventions so that the same people don't have to be the only ones speaking up again and again and again. And when we do this together, this is a way that we can shift the culture together. So I am really proud of how the FFC at CSU has grown and developed in the 2 years since our official launch to be part of this cultural shift. If I may be a boast buddy for all those who have been part of it, we've done some pretty impressive things. We have buttons and stickers. And members have created online resources like our Intersectionality Supplemental Reading Guide to accompany the book, and tip sheets with fight moves for the classroom and inclusive supervision. We have other tip sheets for supporting working parents, for supporting those who are undocumented, and we have more on the way for trans inclusion. As FFC at CSU has grown, operations have been sustained by 6 internal working groups where members help manage things like communications, membership, engagement, and participate in the overall leadership of the effort. And we have had a significant amount of engagement from men, which was our priority in 2018. When we first introduced the book in the FFC at CSU, some people said the language and tone of the book would make men feel like they were being attacked, and some people assumed that men wouldn't even read it. But the book became a core element in the curriculum of the Man Educate Yourself program, or MAY for short, a program designed by men that encouraged men in leadership roles across the institution to reflect on their role and their own behavior and consider the responsibility for them to influence the culture in their own units and division. In 2 years of cohorts, over 70 men across campus participated in the May program, which included an executive session last spring that was specifically tailored for men who serve in roles as VPs or deans. Most men who participated in the Man Educate Yourself program said that they learned a lot from the book. Many leave a copy of it on their desk or have even shared it with their sons. And 2 participants in leadership roles have since worked with me to officially bring the FFC at CSU into their own departments, to have conversations as an entire staff about what they can do collectively to address the most persistent problems in their own areas. And finally, there was so much interest from May participants to continue those conversations and build more opportunities for their ongoing engagement that in January of 2019, we launched another branch of the FFC at CSU to share fight moves for folks with privileged identities. What started as the FFC for Men is now FFC Mask, with monthly meetings that focus on masculinities, allyship, socialization, and culture. And there's a session for that if you would like to learn more. From my vantage point, it has been incredibly compelling to witness how quickly things have shifted under this ethos of the Feminist Fight Club at CSU. Working with other FFC at CSU folks on projects have easily been some of my favorite and most enjoyable working experiences. They are effective, people step up and equitably share the labor, and it is expected that people support each other and the goals of whatever we're working on. There aren't those awkward tensions where people are reluctant to speak up if something happens or someone steps in it. And I think we avoid resentment pretty well, which can arise when some people don't actively contribute to pulling their weight. And I believe that this is why we have been able to do so much with so little in such a short amount of time. Because people are willing to put in work and work hard when they know that everyone is committed to supporting and looking out for one another. And when the culture of a group gels so well, I will say it leaves a lot more room for it to be pretty fun too. So in fact, the experiment of carving out these little spaces, the pockets within the university where things could feel and function differently, was so encouraging that the FFC at CSU gave rise to another experiment to expand this cultural shift a bit further into the institution. Also in January of 2019, it was a busy year, I launched a structured model to inform the culture of nearly 15 other committees that work on gender equity topics related to dependent care, policies and practices to support trans and non-binary employees, women of color, and then all the other employees that are operating under the Women in Gender Collaborative. This model, which I called the systems-based leadership through, whoa, that's a hard mouthful, which I called the systems-based leadership development through service model, situated aspects of the FFC at CSU in the backdrop of how all these committees operate. I described it as changing the culture of culture change committees such that members could support their co-chairs in setting the tone and progress of the committee activities, and co-chairs could get additional support in their own leadership development around how to create working groups that employ the basic tenets of FFC at CSU. Establish shared expectations of all committee members that reflect a culture of accountability, equity, mutual support, and inclusive and intersectional operations. There's a session on creating work groups like that as well. When you combine everyone involved in the FFC at CSU, FFC Mask, participants of the Man Educate Yourself program, units that introduce the FFC into their own departments, and members of the Women in Gender Collaborative committees under the SLEDS model, that's that big mouthful one, that accounts for about 500 employees who have been engaging with the FFC at CSU. And it does not count folks like you who have attended our presentations and workshops over the years, or had classroom visits or student-oriented discussions. So not bad for 2 years since our official launch. So ultimately, when we say that in order to change the culture, we have to do things differently, this is what that has looked like for us. We work together. We show up for each other. We are invested in learning about various topics and issues and then sharing what we learn. We practice developing our skills to intervene and interrupt problematic behaviors, and we hold each other accountable. We are honest, transparent, and authentic. We say, I need some support, and we respond with, how can I support you? We ask for feedback, and we offer, may I give you some feedback? And when we get it, we say thank you. If you've been listening to me talk now, hoping to collect little nuggets of information to take with you and put into practice, I hope a deeper understanding about the importance of feedback is one of them. One thing a friend and colleague, Monica Rivera, director of the Women in Gender Advocacy Center, teaches and role models so well is that feedback is love. How we define our relationship to giving and receiving feedback is a fundamental pillar of culture change and a key practice of the Feminist Fight Club at CSU. This is a good time to plug another one of our sessions later today called Fight Moves and Strategies for Giving and Receiving Feedback, and to remind you of the appreciation stations at tables 8 and 8 and 8. There are 3 tables. I think nearly everyone appreciates being appreciated, but far too few of us are in the practice of genuinely asking for feedback, particularly if we are in leadership roles. We tend to think of feedback as critical or negative, even if it is constructive, and appreciations as positive affirmations or maybe positive feedback. But I have grown to think of appreciations and feedback as very similar and related things. Much like appreciation, feedback takes time. Giving feedback and sharing appreciations demonstrate our respect by investing in others. They say, I see you, I recognize and value what you are doing, and I believe in your capacity to grow, learn, and do better. And giving in feedback and appreciation requires that we extend ourselves, sometimes a little or a lot, and they are crucial practices of culture change because we can do things better when we support each other to be better, and we can't and don't do much of anything well if we do it alone. They are also important practices because feedback and appreciations are ways to make your voice heard. They make space for testimony. Appreciations reinforce that something is worthy, valuable, and important, and feedback, positive or so-called negative feedback, actually comes from a similar place. It says that something is worthy, valuable, and important. Thus, some say feedback is love. I often think of feedback as a gift, and in that sense, to generously give feedback and appreciations, that's a fight move. To graciously ask for and receive all those things can also be a fight move. So as I wrap up this address, I will leave you with an ask and a couple more fight moves. It is notoriously difficult to assess and measure the impact of culture change efforts. We can list out what we have done, number and name all the different programs, but with respect to culture, it's hard to demonstrate what has changed or how things have changed. I've previously described culture in spaces as the stuff that happens on the in-between of things and people and structures, but it's also the stuff that you sort of have to be there to know, feel, and see how it changes. This morning, we sent out an email to everyone on our FFC at CSU and FFC mask listservs asking you to submit responses to an impact survey. We are looking for your thoughtful and consideration and responses about thoughtfulness, consideration, and responses about how the FFC at CSU and the Women in Gender Collaborative have impacted the institution and also you on personal and professional levels. We will only be collecting responses for a week, so please submit your responses before Monday, October 21st. Since there are plenty of people who aren't on our listservs, here's another fight move you can do. If you receive that email, please forward the link to others in your department or your unit who may have been involved in or impacted by our collective efforts to improve the culture and climate around gender here, and encourage them to submit their responses. If you want an extra fight move, you can follow up with them before the end of the week to make sure that they did respond. And if you aren't yet on our listservs but want to give voice to the impact of these efforts, we have hard copies available on your tables and will throughout the rest of the symposium as well. You can fill one out or you can grab this, the short link to the survey from it and type just that into your browser. But if you do prefer a hard copy, you can return it to us in person, you can place it in the envelope on your table, or send it anonymously to us back through campus mail. And finally, if you'd like to be on our listservs, please write your name on the membership sign-in on your tables. If you are planning to stay for the table discussion and that member meet and greet that follows this, I hope you will talk with each other about your experiences with the Feminist Fight Club at Colorado State University and the other ways that we have been changing the culture around gender. So I want to end this address with a note of deep gratitude. Through all of our experimentations and dynamic changes, I know the FFC at CSU has been a worthwhile endeavor. In my own experience, I have learned so much and can confidently say that I have become a better professional, a better advocate and accomplice, a better colleague, and a better friend because of the FFC at CSU and the people who've been involved with it. But I'm not just saying it was worthwhile simply because I got so much out of it. I'm saying this because I know now more than ever that changing culture is really hard, if not impossible, unless we do it together. So I am so grateful for every person who's been a part of the FFC at CSU because they believed in it enough to give it a shot too. Sometimes it's been challenging and frustrating and maybe even a little bit exhausting, but I think it's also been encouraging, exciting, empowering, and inspiring. We haven't demanded or expected perfection from our tools, and we acknowledge that ourselves as members are not perfect either. But we have been learning and growing and changing together, and we are doing things differently. We have done really amazing and unique things here at Colorado State University, and I believe we can and will continue to do that work together, like potatoes of defiance. To all of the members of the Feminist Fight Club at CSU, past, present, and hopefully future, thank you for being part of the effort, and thank you for all that you do. What? Thank you all. You all are just amazing. Please do stay for the meet and greet. Let's cue up some music, and we're just going to hang out here for the hour and then check out some of those sessions later on today. Thank you so much.